So let's go ahead and Matt, call the roll.
Councilmember Reed, Kimberly Walton, LaShondra Rayfield, Katie McFadden,
Present.
Omar Salem,
Present.
Darlene Cannon,
Present.
Jane Grover,
I'm here.
Carla Thomas.
Present.
We have a quorum.
So the first item of business is to approve the minutes from the last meeting on April 28th. Hopefully people have had a chance to review those minutes. I will give 2 minutes right now, just in case you haven't, because life is life. So I'll give folks 2 minutes to catch up if they haven't had a chance. And if anybody is willing to make a motion to either pass, or if anybody has comments on the actual minutes, or things that they think that need to be adjusted.
I can move to approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Matt, am I doing this right?
Aye.
Aye.
There we go. Okay, so move to approve the minutes of April 28th. Before we open up ourselves to public comment, which is the next thing we will do, I kind of just, I don't know, I personally feel like I can't not make space to recognize we are a racial equity committee, and I don't know that I can kind of start this meeting without making space to recognize the racial equity turmoil that our city finds itself in. I mean, quite frankly, on so many fronts, but in particular in the overt racial harm that was many of our Black and brown kids were exposed to this week at Haven. And so I want to kind of recognize that and recognize the harm and the burden and the heartache that places on the Black and brown members of our community, Black and brown members of our commission. I mean, I don't know, like we're working on the systemic stuff, but then that day-to-day interactional, in-your-face, harmful stuff, yeah, it knocks us all in the knees and makes us buckle. So, and it, I am hoping that, as part of the council, but also as a Black parent in our schools, I am hoping that this, ignites in the community some of the work that, we sit on this volunteer board every month to do, but, a real look inwards and look at how we can sort of change moving forward. But yeah, I didn't want to move forward without taking a moment to recognize that, because this is a hard period for everyone, well, particularly for the Black community. So I'm gonna breathe and say woo yeah, and then I'm gonna open it up for public comment. Rick?
Yes, I'm assuming this is the correct place to do this evening, but so I'm Rick Nelson and I am the co-chair of Environmental Justice Evanston. And Andy Schlickman has been our representative who has sat in for several meetings. And Andy is actually recently married and has some additional priorities and additional demands on his time because of that, which is very understandable. So I'm actually going to be sitting in as the representative at this point in time. And so I just wanted to introduce myself. And at this point in time, I envision that I will actually stay involved. But at this point in time, it's also possible that someone else in perhaps 6 months from now may come in and I may transition out. But I'm actually very interested in what the commission is doing and very enthusiastic about participating.
Welcome, Rick. And thank you for doing that. And you are item number C on our discussion section later on today.
Okay.
And so hopefully we will chat with you again. See, I just opened my window to get some air in here and now you can hear more of my party. So I'm gonna close that window, sorry. Not my personal party, but the party across the street. So I'll just be hot in here. So welcome to the council. And
Thank you.
you know, we have some items we want to chat with because I think this group just recently recognized that the Equity and Empowerment Commission actually was written into the environmental justice resolution as having a role. And so look at me behind the eighth ball, just figuring that out. So we'll talk about that a little bit in item C. All right. Oh, yeah, we have a second person. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, all. I just wanted to, Eileen Hogan-Heineman from YWCA. I just wanted to find out if there's an end date on the equity survey. And I know you're going to be talking about that later, but just because we want to keep posting it on our social media and whatnot, but I didn't want to go past when it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, so this may not be convention, but I am anything but conventional, so.
Not a surprise.
I am not here for end dates. End dates just create arbitrary end states as opposed to creating an arbitrary end goal. And as we repeated, that our goal is to ensure that we have a representative, not statistical sample, because you know I don't know that we're going to get there, but at least a representative proportional sample of our community, and that's what I'm going to say, Uncle. And so we are going to constantly check in to see where we're doing and understand, because we've built into the survey, you know, demographics of who we're hitting, so that we can then target groups that we're not hearing from as we go along, which is why we're going to do this update consistently. And I get updates once a week, so I will kind of be looking at that and kind of processing in between with LaShandra and thinking about who we can help get us to those population pockets that we're not getting to. So there is no date. I'm not here for arbitrary end dates. So that's where we're at. So keep pushing. Keep pushing.
Great, we will.
So Matt, you want to give us a quick overview?
Yes. So I'll just share my screen. Okay. Sorry. And I can no longer see you because I'm on my laptop. Can you all see?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, to get it back to the beginning. Okay, so as of last Friday, we had 462 responses, and almost everyone who has responded to the survey lives in Evanston. I looked and there are 12 people maybe just work in Evanston, or maybe they just go to school in Evanston who have responded, but 97% live in Evanston. There's a pretty broad kind of cross-section of wards who have participated. The lowest participation is from Ward 1, or the first ward. And then this is maybe where it becomes a little bit more interesting for you all. And I'm going to flip back and forth between a couple slides so we can kind of see how it compares. But the response rate has been 64% or 65% from white people. And this is the US Census data. And you can see that that is fairly representative of Evanston. The Asian or Asian American community has responded at 4% of the respondents. And that is a little bit low, as 9% of Evanstonians are Asian. For Black or African American, 14% of respondents identify that way, and the city of Evanston is about 16%, so it's a little bit low, but close. For Hispanic or Latinx, 6.5% of respondents, and Hispanic or Latino make up 11% or 12% of Evanston, depending on how you round. So a little bit low there as well. As far as household income goes, I won't bounce all around in the same way I did there, but it's pretty similar to kind of the representative data that I was able to find. You can see that the sort of distribution curve starts going up around $55,000 a year for household income, and starts going back down at around $145,000 household income. And this is data from Data USA for all of Evanston, and it shows that a pretty similar trend with a curve kind of peaking around $100,000 of income, and then also a large portion of residents making over $200,000 a year in household income. And you can see that as well in the respondents. As far as age goes, I think the main takeaway is that not very many young people in the under 16 to 21, 21 to 25, or 22 to 25, and 26 to 35 have responded. I'm sorry, there's a siren if you can hear that. And so this is from Data USA as well, and this shows basically that we should be shooting for roughly equal from 18 to 45. So is finding ways to target young people, I think, would be beneficial. And then this is just the disability information, where 80% of respondents say they do not have a disability. And then the housing situation, 14% of respondents say that they lease or rent, while 78.5% say they own their property. And then only 5 respondents say they're staying with another family. And this is just from Data USA again about the home ownership in Evanston, showing that roughly about half of people in Evanston own their homes. So I think another potential target could be people who are renting.
Thank you, Matt. And so other different things will stand out to different people. So please don't let my list to be the main thing, but also recognizing that we can't, you know, in any given month, if we're trying to push a specific push, we can't cover everybody. But the things that popped out to me is that our outreach, and I'm going to always put the onus on the system and not on the people. So our outreach to the Hispanic population is lacking. Our outreach to the youth population is lacking, and our outreach to folks who rent or own their home is rent their home, is lacking. And so part of how I'm going to run this is kind of every month when we meet, this stuff in between, but like try to push you guys to brainstorm as a group, what can we do to sort of fill the gaps that we're seeing. And, you know, over the next couple of months, we'll kind of target certain gaps, as well as 400 is diddly squat, right, for our community. So there's a general push that we need more. So what events are coming up, what people are gathering where, what things coming up that you know of that will help us address the general response rate, as well as how can we get to, I'm going to name those three if anybody, sorry, if anything hopped out at anybody else, please bring it. But we're looking for improving our outreach to the Hispanic population, the youth population, and then folks who rent their homes. So I'm going to open the floor. I have a couple ideas, but I'm going to open the floor first.
So I've got a couple ideas. Might be important for us before the high school finishes the semester is to get into the high school, obviously, and don't underestimate their ability to, the students' ability to participate and do a survey and add their wisdom to it. How do we feel about doing some specific outreach to Northwestern students who are also renters? So they hit a different kind of demographic, a different profile of renters in our community, but we have students living off campus. It's probably a couple thousand, and it wouldn't be hard to drop flyers at some of the off-campus housing in the 1st, 5th, and 7th wards to encourage them to also fill out the survey, but that would get responses from many student residents who won't be with us by the end of the year. So a lot of them are 4th years and maybe graduating next month. But then again, there may be other students coming home for this summer. So maybe there's a way to also get to some of the students who are coming back home for the summer to Evanston. They are residents as well. And I'm guessing there are landlord associations that maybe they could help us out in sharing the survey with the tenants. Is there a tenant association in the city too? I don't know. The city, maybe the city has some resources too for tenants that could be posted on the web page. I know there's a landlord tenant ordinance and some other resources the city has. So perhaps this could go there for tenants, renters who are looking for information. They could find this as well, the survey. Just some off the cuff. More will occur to me because it always does once we've.
So I want to kind of riff off of a couple of things you said there. So I was actually thinking the same thing with the end of the semester/quarter happening soon. Both, you know, across Northwestern, which is on a quarter system, the high school, which is on a the semester system. But couple of things. One, I am going to see what I can do about like if reaching out to the communications person at Northwestern to see if we can get that there. And again, I don't want to worry too much about anybody's thinking like, well, the Northwestern student needs aren't they like permanent student, like the permanent needs of Evanston. While that is true 100%, I'm not denying that. But we have the opportunity to then break it up between people who just go to school here and you know, so we have an opportunity to kind of make sure that later on we are addressing addressing the needs of like a permanent population in Evanston.
We have quite a few Evanston students who are also at Northwestern.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And so I will reach out to the communications person at Northwestern if anybody has any other ideas how to get it there. And then interestingly enough, I have another Northwestern contact that could potentially get us into the high school. And I know a couple of high school teachers that I will try that route, asking their students to kind of, do the civic thing and, let their voice be heard. There's a Northwestern high school liaison, so the person sitting there who has helped get me voices of students in the past. And so I can try that. If anybody else has any contacts, knows any teachers, this is where a personal ask is better. So rather than having me ask somebody I don't know, if you know them, sending that same email that I asked you guys to send out to people, again, targeting anyone who you think can get us in contact with students and particular seniors, right? Like, I don't know, I'm guessing a 14-year-old doesn't really give a shit about like youth employment yet. I don't know, maybe they do. But like the 16-year-old is going to start thinking about that, right? Like, sorry, the 18-year-old who's about to graduate is really going to start thinking about that and have it, have the stuff to tell us about. So, or, the 14-year-old might care about employment in the summer, and that might be a valid thing. So I don't want to like discount anybody's wisdom because there's all sorts of ways of knowing. So yeah, if anybody has any other ideas on those, please let us know.
I wonder if Corey Winchester is still facilitating, supporting the Students Organized Against Racism at ETHS. Is Corey?
He is, and he's a classmate of mine. So thank you for bringing that up. I am going to put him on my list.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
He is still doing that.
Great.
Anybody know anything more about like the landlord situation? Is there like an organization for landlords in Evanston of any sort? Like Jane was hinting at that, but anybody who's
Matt, maybe there's a way to talk to somebody in community development in Johanna Leonard's division. Sarah Flax might know if there's anybody who can connect us to landlords. They certainly show up to object when we talk about licensing or registering landlords. So we've got them on public record in that way. There are a couple events coming up. I put in the Race Against Hate, which, is 5,000 people gathering at Longfield in June, Father's Day Sunday, I think. And maybe with a flyer with a QR code that could be scanned or handed out or do a table there. I'm registering voters at the farmer's market maybe next Saturday. League of Women Voters is doing that. So if I had something I could hand out, I'd be happy to do that there.
Matt, Matt, is there a way, or Jane, do you have access to, I made the flyers already with QR code. So if you have options to print and can print that, great. If not, Matt I don't know how we can figure out the city, using the city for printing and getting it to people who have events.
Yeah, so I think I can print several of them. And Carla, I took the flyer that you sent me and sent it to the communications people in the CMO, and they it's basically the same flyer, it just is now within the city style guide. So it's
okay.
Matt, are you going to be at the State of the City tomorrow?
I was not planning to. But
I can pick up copies from you if
there's you can leave it with somebody for her.
Yeah. Okay.
I am not going to be here for Race Against Hate this year. All right, great. So, and Eileen, do you have access to somewhere to mass copy, or do we need to arrange for Matt to get you a pile?
Yeah, I just dropped a note in the chat. If you could send me the flyer, we could have some copies, and especially if you could send the QR code, we could have that posted big that people could just take it on their phones.
Yep. All right, Race Against Hate. I will get that. I'm putting that on my list. Anybody has any other events? And then we haven't really addressed the Hispanic population.
District 65 has their big Pep Fest on June 3rd, I think it is, June 4th.
Yeah, I will make sure that is there. I somehow have like 3 booths that I'm supposed to be at that day.
We can have some at our booth that day too.
Yeah, but I will hand it out and try to make sure that all booths. That's a great idea.
What's this event? What's the event?
It's so D65 PTAs worked for 5 years to create a more equitable PTA across all the schools, so that one school wasn't raising, 80-something thousand dollars while another one was raising $9 a year. And so now it's called PEP for PTA Equity Project. And so they're having one big festival event fundraiser type thing at the end of the school year. And so, yes, thank you for that idea. That's excellent. I had made sure we had several Latinx business owners as well as church affiliations in my kind of email to the community that went out to 90, but I will once again try to send a separate, not like a mass email that goes out to everybody. I want to reinforce that all the statisticky things show that a personal ask to somebody is more likely to get people to do things, as opposed to just me asking a bunch of people who, on some directory said that they represent some organization. So if you know people who are active or prominent in any of these areas, please consider taking that email that I sent again, kind of recrafting in any way for yourself and trying to target these areas. And the hope is that we see a bump in these areas next time we meet, as well as we just need more responses, period. Right. Anybody else sees anything that we need to be, and we need growth in everywhere, but like anything else that pops out at somebody or have ideas of getting to other populations that might just be easy grabs. All right.
One last question, not about the distribution recruiting for it. When are you thinking, Carla, about sharing some of the preliminary results, not just the demographics about who's responding to the survey, but some of the other good information that I'm sure is in the responses? What's your thinking on this?
Yeah, let me think about, to be fair, I've been focused on the demographics as opposed to like focusing on the responses. Except for one where, like 30% of our town doesn't really give a shit or doesn't think that equity is a problem or that it's a government responsibility anyway. That one was like, ooh, twist. But other than and that one that slapped me in the face, I haven't really been paying attention. So I think there's some possibility there, Jane, that like there are a couple of things that we could use in a marketing type way. Like, hey, X percentage of our community thinks X. What do you think? Click here to, or use this QR code here to. And so I think we could use it. And I just haven't looked at the data enough to be able to kind of figure out which one of those. But again, that's another great idea. Taking notes. All right, so if there's nothing else on this, I'd like to slip one thing into the agenda while it's on my mind, because it's quick and it's more of a homework for you, Matt. So Kimberly hasn't been here in a couple of sessions, and I know way back not back in March, but in February or something, I don't know, whenever, when Alejandra was leaving and we were asking who was interested in stepping up, she said she would be moving. Have we gotten a formal exit from the committee at all?
For
Kimberly?
Richardson?
No, Kimberly Walton.
Oh, not as far as I know.
Okay, so I don't know how that works. Is that just up to me? I'm happy to email her, but I just want to check. I knew she was moving at some point in time. I'm just checking in. I'm not trying to push anybody out the door, for sure. But I feel like the last few sessions we have been struggling just to meet quorum, and essentially we're a couple people short. So I think we were one short before that. And then if she's leaving, she will be leaving shortly. So my next ask to you is, I believe there was one other person. I can't even remember a name, but I know there was somebody who put in an application for to be on this committee, like right as we were selecting the new folks who came on already. And so I don't even know that person has been reviewed, because at that point we kind of decided. And so it's kind of checking in with wherever that repository of applications are, see if we have anybody else, and then like trying to get that before the mayor for some appointment, because we are seem to be scraping our quorum,
Mhm.
and we're a few people short. So I want to slip that in. It's not a huge discussion, but if you can kind of check in on that, and you could just email me and let me know if we have anybody else besides that one. It was a gentleman. I can't for the life of me remember his name. So there should be at least one person. He may not be interested still. It's 4 months later or whatever. And see if anybody else has applied. And then we can kind of put out a collective call for applicants. If you guys know of anybody you think would make a good addition to our team, please share it. But at the same time, I really like to put this call out to the community. Not I know a friend who I know, like, you know, people always get on these things who are connected in some way. The point is it should be open to the entire community, not like because you're connected. So I'll just slip that in. All right, so the equity scorecard test. And before we start on the equity scorecard test itself, and so I don't know if anybody wasn't here last week, but the whole point of today is that we felt like we may prove this. The whole point of today is to break the equity scorecard model that we have, right? Like you test it, you pilot it, you see what, you try to run something through the system and see what's working and not working. So do not be afraid to point out what's not working, because that's the whole point of today. It's not going to hurt anybody's feelings. The point is to stress the system. But before we even start stressing the system, I want to take us back to folks who weren't here when we started this whole scorecard, the idea of the scorecard journey. It might seem like a long time ago now, but it was still within COVID when we were first looking for a new city manager. And it was right after we had the first version of this, and we felt like the city manager process did not go in a transparent / equitable way, etc. And it's the frustration behind that led us to this idea of creating this equity scorecard to some way weigh in as a equity council about what the city was doing. We find ourselves, you know, in round 3 of this, and I'm just gonna honestly say I had a lot to say about the first one because I followed it because we were all trapped in our house with COVID. I had somewhat to say about the second one. I don't have a lot to say about this one because honestly, I have been too wrapped up with a ton of other shit. So I'm not having this conversation to make commentary about what's going on because I don't speak about things that I haven't personally followed. I'm not sharing anybody hearsay. But I feel like when we look at this scorecard, some level of the city finds itself in a space where they're not happy with how things have gone. And again, I'm not commenting here because I haven't followed it. But as I look at the scorecard, I'm like, the scorecard doesn't really give us room to address this in the forced fashion. And it just strikes me as interesting because here we are again with some level of unhappiness, right? I'm not speaking to that right now. I'm focusing on the systems. But the thing we created, which is not useless, right? It has its uses and it has its situation, doesn't address the first issue that drove us to create it in the first place. And so I kind of want to think about that together out loud. Because, you know, even at the scorecard at 90%, if I could go back and have it, you know, at 100% 4 months ago, you know, when they were starting this new wave, it doesn't present a way for us to address this. If we were to do a scorecard and if I, you know, somebody like we collectively decided to follow this process from the beginning, you know, turning in this now is too late, or turning in this even 2 weeks ago is too late. We are not allowed to be in the closed session. And so I guess I want to bring that up because this was one of the original things that drove us to create this. So before we start with the test, and what we've created doesn't address this situation. It addresses other things, right? So we're not saying it's a waste. And I just wanted to point that out because that occurred to me. Yeah, so I'm just kind of putting that out there. What does that mean for the EEC's role in things like in major decisions of, and again, role not meaning we get a vote, right? Like I mean, maybe somebody out there is dreaming big like that, but like, what works to get a collective weigh in of the EEC in something like this? Because this scorecard doesn't do it for this situation.
Carla, are you saying that it doesn't do it for the city manager search? And is that because
Yeah.
it's a process rather than like a policy?
It's a
Almost.
Yeah, and that's it, right? Like, so there's two things. Like you're breaking out this. We could go back in time and we technically can absolutely look at the process and score the process. And again, with the point of it being fixed for the next time, right? Like, or whatever. So we could say there's a problem with the process. There's HR situations with any hiring. So, and there's rules there. So like, again, I'm not bull-faced trying to just break all other rules and insert. Yeah, so we could break this up into process, period, or, I keep going back to this idea that in business, and this is not a business, it's a government, but there's a finance guy in every meeting, right? No matter what you're talking about, there's a finance guy there, right? Because if you can't pay for it, or if it doesn't make money, we're not doing it. So the finance guy is in every meeting. And ultimately, that's my goal for how we see equity, right? There's an equity person in every meeting. I didn't mean to say that it was a guy doing all the finance person in every meeting. Because they're just shining that light. Oh, that doesn't make financial sense. Oh, that's an equity problem there. That's an equity stumbling block. They just keep shining the light on this. And so, I guess I keep coming back to that in my mind, even if an equity person, like we have rules, the council votes on these things, the mayor votes on these things. I'm not particularly trying to touch that. I'm trying to say that like, there are other people in that room while it's going on, not just those, not the council and the mayor. What if there was an equity lens person in that? And not only for this kind of decision, right? Like as I said, I have very little to say about this particular process because I haven't been following it. So this is not a gripe issue. This is because I've had gripe issues in the past. This is more of a, let's look at the process. And we don't necessarily have to answer this now. I just wanted to point out that I realized that what we've created doesn't solve the problem that first starting us on this path. So I don't know that we have to answer this. I just wanted to point that out. It's just particularly hot today. Everybody's had enough. Is everybody agreeing with me, disagreeing with me? Does anybody see how it could be bent to be used?
In an ideal world, we wouldn't need a specific person in the room. Everybody would have not just either an actual scorecard that they use to evaluate projects like at the DAPR meetings or the city council, or, it could be a desktop reference that folks refer to like Robert's Rules of Order. So every decision kind of goes through this, or, in an ideal world, you wouldn't need to even refer to the scorecard because it would just be part of the thinking process for everyone. But I think we're a long way off from that.
Yeah.
But if we create it as a tool that's accessible and easy to use, maybe it becomes part of the routine and process.
Yeah. And that's, when something is like a system, like a process, like Robert Rules,
right?
You can kind of look in the chart and you're like, okay, this happened, like, and you can do that with gauging, like people are just speaking, right? Like gauging, it's not a matter of like, oh, the person said equity 3 times, tick, like it doesn't work like that. So there isn't a way, this concept has been along for a long time. If it was as quick, but if a scorecard looked like that, it would have been created for all of us. So, unless somebody is sort of trained to then pull out the problematic pieces and sort of them, show, or not problematic or positive, like, hey, these 3 people just spoke. The person with the equity lens, just like the person with the finance lens, often you ask the finance person to say, hey, what does that actually mean to us in dollars, right? And so like you ask the equity person, what did you hear? Like what, translate for me, because I don't have the lens, translate for me how you interpreted the equity chops, for lack of a better term, of the people who just spoke here. And I don't know that that's the right thing. I don't know that that's possible. As I said, I just wanted to point out that
Carla, I really like that, comparison, because I think that's exactly what would happen in the business world or even in like public education, which is where a lot of my experience is. I think the difference though too is like the finance people are like looked up to and well paid and everyone trusts them. And I feel like when it comes to equity, it's the opposite. It's like, oh great, here they go. You know, can you imagine if you were the director of equity or something and you're in that meeting and you say something, people are gonna roll their eyes. Like, and I'm not saying that's what happens in Evanston City or whatever, but that's the experience I've seen in other places. And so I'm wholeheartedly agreeing with you.
Yeah.
But
I know,
don't
Mark,
know how we
Evanston
carry it
is
out.
not special. We're just as broken.
Right. But again, I haven't seen it personally, so I don't want to say that that's where it's happening.
Yeah.
But in things I've been in, that's exactly what happened. But I think to your point, that's exactly what needs to be done.
So, and Jane, you're probably our closest person who's actually been on the council, and then maybe Matt. And I'm, you know, I don't know if the press people are here today, but please don't go say Carla said that, because this has been a pattern recently, that this is what's going to happen because Carla is not about to say this. But like, what are the criteria about people being in the room? Let's just start there, right? Again, I'm not talking about a vote. I'm talking about other people being in the room. If we can kind of just take that back and figure out that, like, is it even something that we can consider with these large decisions, that the equity person is in the room to give their opinion based on what is heard and then leave the room for the vote even, right? But like that you're getting the voice. And Omar, I'm not like downplaying what you said, but America is racist, period, right? Like, and so like, we can at least start getting that voice in the room. It doesn't mean tomorrow everybody starts paying attention to the voice. But again, we got to make progress forward. And so I guess that's just my thinking. If anybody has any other ways around it, but I want to point out that we didn't exactly solve our original problem.
Carla, I would actually say, I think we should do that and maybe have 2 or 3 of us there. So at least we are together to be able to do. And I think that's a good point. Like, I think one of the first meetings you spoke about how you don't like Robert's Rules of Order or something. And I agree with you, because I think a lot of times people use them as a tool to silence what they don't want to hear. Like, why are some of these things happening in closed session? Why can't we see it? Like, even if they're discussing salary or whatever, like that's going to be public anyway. So why can't we be a part of it? And so for better or worse, the mayor picked 9 of us to be the equity people in this city. So why can't some of us be in those, at least listening in on those discussions and pointing out what we hear based on our expertise and experiences? And
I like how you kind of broaden out the closed session, because I was trying not to harp. As I said, I really have not followed this last round. I just haven't had the energy and bandwidth. So I like how you broaden it, because I know this is not just a situation of hiring or firing, as we've had to do a person on an issue. So it could be this concept of, we have these closed sessions and there isn't a lens in that room. And if it's a matter of providing the lens and then leaving, we don't get a vote. But all right. So Jane and I will ask this question to Alderperson Reed as well. But yeah, I don't know what the city guidelines are, and Matt, I don't know, you might be able to look into this as well. What the city guidelines of who gets to be in a room and not get to be in a room. I know there's some other people in there. I don't know who they are. Don't know what they do, but it just made me a good opportunity for us to, we're going to talk about the ordinance in a little bit, and the discussion that has started between Devon, Katie, and I on that. And it may be something else we put into the audience to capture situations like this that fall out of the scorecard. So that's the last I have to say on that. Anybody else before we get to
Another approach is to get in the hands of the people who are in the room the tool, the scorecard. And it's hard to know, we can't know what happens in the room, but if they're equipped with the scorecard, maybe that becomes part of the conversation. I don't know which of the council members would be inclined to use it and think that way. And
Yeah, and part of the issue there is that
Yeah,
the scorecard is only good if you speak the language or you can interpret the language.
Yeah.
And until we get to a place where the people sitting on the city council have, what we repeatedly call a lens, right? They can interpret what they hear, not just somebody said the word equity. To gauge, if you were to give that person an X out of X for really managing that question, I could put 99 scorecards in front of them.
I know.
Yeah, a portion of the measurement system is broken, which is the scorecard and the person. And if the person doesn't have the knowledge and the ability to decipher, it's.
I think Councilmember Reed may have a better sense of this.
Yeah,
Being in the
so.
room and knowing that his council members.
And he also seems to know all the rules that my mind can't wrap
Oh, yeah.
around. So.
Former clerk makes him
Yeah.
an expert on this.
All right, so I would like to, you know what, Matt, I'm realizing that we didn't actually send out the latest version of the scorecard itself. And so I'm going to share.
Has it changed since last?
No, it hasn't changed since last. If you look up your last email, you'll get that. But I have decided, so we were kind of, again, today we're going to practice, like we're going to rough talk out. This is not an actual scoring of this. Nope, like this isn't going anywhere. This is us just talking it through, right? Like we're pretending we have an item. We did not go and talk to all the people involved, the decision makers and all that stuff. But again, it's a practice session. So essentially, if you open up the document that was draft 5 from last time, we're really just kind of trying to get ourselves to page 8. And then I did have Matt send out, oh, there we go. Matt just put the link in the chat. Anybody who's searching wildly in their emails. Matt did send out some information about our two documents in this week's email about Evanston's anti-panhandling strategy, which is something that was done, I think, last January, and then the signs that went up. Well, maybe not last January. That seems to have a date of 2001. I don't know. It was posted again last January. I don't know why. That's where I picked it up from. And then there are signs that went up in our community a couple of months ago, as well as I added the panhandling ordinance. Couple of things I'd just like to lay out here because these definitions were important. And I only discovered it from the ordinance that panhandling, per the federal guidelines is allowed. It's considered freedom of, movement, speech, whatever. But, you've been hearing the term aggressive thrown around. Aggressive is not in the actual ordinance, but it's this idea of active versus passive. So our federal government has decided that it is okay to stand on the side of the road and look forlorn and hope somebody gives you money. But technically, when there's not supposed to be an ask as sort of the definition. So I did not know that defined panhandling. I did not know that asking made a difference or whatever. So when you hear the term aggressive panhandling, I think it's, at first I got mad and there's definitely a reason why people use the word aggressive, because most humans have a general idea of what aggressive means and we take that meaning with us. But this concept is the concept of asking versus, just standing there looking forlorn. So I kind of wanted to make that differentiation to people because I think that was important for me to kind of understand what the actual legal definition, for whatever it's worth, whether we should have a legal definition. And then, the ordinance is pretty short on there, where it talks about what the requirement, what the rights of a panhandler are or are not. And then I did send a picture. Did the picture come over, Matt? Was the picture of the actual?
Of the signs?
Yeah.
I can,
And I'm gonna share it then. I'm gonna
okay.
share a picture of the sign so we can see it, because this is just kind of part of the stuff I feel like everybody needs to C to be able to better have this discussion. Keep reading that while I look for the picture. And I sent him that.
And are you all evaluating the entire, or using a scorecard to evaluate the entire city's panhandling policy, or is it just the signs, or?
Yeah, for right now, for simplification, and again, this is not going to be an action. I'm not going to turn this around and then send it to the city and say, hey, we scored. Like, this is a practice messy round. I just want to be clear on everybody. I'm going to share my, so this, I want to just focus on the signs, the most recent action on this item. Share screen. All right, so if you see my screen, for anybody who hasn't physically seen the signs, have a heart, give smart, as Evanston Panhandle isn't safe. Donate to social service organizations today, need, and then something for the folks who need help, call this number, and then there's a website that they would find on their, you know, reliable Wi-Fi service, I don't know, where they can get resources. And so I thought this was interesting, you know, if anybody could even screenshot what they're seeing here, so I can click off, so you have a copy of this, because it was interesting to me personally that it says panhandling isn't safe, even though federally panhandling is a right and a law, and it has gone all the way up to the Supreme Court. All right, so I'm going to stop that, but everybody sees the signs. And I'm going to pull up now. And again, the purpose here is not to, there's some of these questions we're not going to be able to answer because, like, I did not sit down and have a discussion with the city manager's office, which is where this originated from, about whether they met with people or not. The point here is to be able to answer, like, if I were sitting with the person who started this, could I get this answer? Or, you know what, like, they wouldn't even know that. Or, so if you guys understand, we're not scoring, we're kind of trying to see if we would be able to get this information. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. It's going to have, all right, so again, we're talking about the panhandling signs, not the ordinances itself, not to say that we wouldn't choose to put all that together. Sorry, my drawer is not closing. That we wouldn't choose to put that all together, but I want to simplify so we can get through this for our purposes. All right, so were key stakeholders engaged when they were making this decision? And so we would identify the key stakeholders here as who? This is a team sport, folks.
Citizens?
So, I mean, go ahead.
Unhoused people and citizens, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Unhoused people, you even use the right language. Thank you. Right, unhoused people and the citizens, right? Like, for whatever my personal beliefs are about the fragile people who are calling this aggressive panhandling, again, that's my personal beliefs. At the end of the day, they are stakeholders, right? Maybe, you know, aggressive panhandling is real. Maybe people are getting, I don't know. We don't know. We're not here to judge in this. I mean, I judge on my own personal time, but in this, you're not here to judge. There are two sets of stakeholders here, or at least, you know, two major stakeholders. There might be some other ones. Unhoused people, and then the residents of the city. And so I would be interested here in finding out, like, where is this information coming from? Like, if I were assigned from the EEC to go, like, what complaints do they actually have from the residents from the city? Where is this voice coming from that there's a problem? And then have any efforts been made to chat with people who are unhoused, people who are panhandling? Jane?
Thanks, Carla. So this looks like the ordinance was from 2012, 2013. That is, and I would have been on the council then. And I really don't remember. I think I vaguely remember there being complaints about aggressive panhandling downtown, in the downtown area, but nowhere else in the city. The ordinance obviously prohibits soliciting everywhere too. That is the door-to-door before 9 and after 6. I don't recall any kind of meaningful public engagement to solicit input or comments on the panhandling ordinance, and I don't recall anybody coming to council to offer. But then again, it was 9 years ago, and I don't remember. So I don't remember there being much discussion about it at all.
All right, and so let's, if we,
And I really doubt that there was any kind of community engagement on it. So it was probably responsive. I may be wrong about this. I think it was responsive to some complaints about panhandling downtown.
and so again, if I were the person interviewing, say Jane was representative of a city council member at the time, granted, she doesn't remember all here, again, we're not holding this to anybody, but you know, I'd want to know where the complaints were. I want to know if the complaints were somehow representative of some threshold of some real issue, or did Jane's best friend happen to be important enough to, you know, be one of the people, you know, like, or if the people who, and then one of the key questions in here, and I'm going to highlight it here, you know, the focus is supposed to be those who are adversely. And so if we only heard from the folks who were trying to get their Target / Starbucks / Whole Food shopping done, and we made no attempt to find out anything or to reach out to people who are adversely affected by this, this would lead me to a much lower score than, you know, on the 0 to 5 range, than a higher score. And so again, the whole point at the end, when I scroll down, right, there's a whole comment section at the end, which part of what I'm realizing is that, see, this is the whole point of doing this. If I wanted to comment on this, I would put the way it's going to be, it's not going to be formatted like this. I would then say, I'm giving it a 0 to whatever, and I would type in here, that's not going to be in there. It's going to be shaded over the box, it's the whole thing. But I will type in here, I'm giving it a 0 because I learned from Councilwoman Grover that, like, there was feedback from the city members, but nothing from the folks who were most affected by this. The other thing I might want, actually, the other thing I might just mention here is that, you know, there's a racial correlation with who's more likely to be unhoused in our population. And so this actually has an adverse effect on a racial perspective that wasn't taken into consideration, right? Now, we may have had a situation where the city reached out in a future Evanston, where we're trying harder, reached out and sent Matt the intern out to hang out outside of Starbucks or Whole Foods or whatever, and interview a few people and talk to them about, you know, we're trying to create the balance here. What are the, you know, like, you're out here asking, what are the things that you need now that you couldn't get from the pantry and the other things that are written on the anti-panhandling, which are kind of for more planning needs, right? Monday I'll go here, and Tuesday I'll go here if I can get transport over to that church on the southwest side of town or whatever, right? How does this not, so we might have heard from them that they made these efforts to find out. And so they may have just spoken to them and nothing was done to address it. And then we might end up somewhere in this 2 to 3 range, or we might spoke to them and then, you know, Matt bringing that information back. That's maybe where the phone number came from. That may be their mitigation factor. I don't know. But are we generally understanding how we would try to evaluate and ask this question? Any questions? All right. You know, I think I stepped into question 2 a little bit, and it's not a particular history of Evanston, of like the racial inequities, but you may choose to cite a statistic, which I'm sure they're out there a dime a dozen, done by, you know, different agencies of like the racial lines around homelessness and racial lines, and show that there is actually a racial impact. But what racial ethnic groups are currently most disadvantaged, again, in this realm, by the issue proposed by the city, and how are they affected differently, and what quantitative or qualitative evidence of inequity exists? So I don't know if Evanston has unhoused data that might tell us, and I don't know if we just have to use a Chicagoland data or a national data, but we should be able to pull up that, there is a disproportion of who would be affected by this? And has the city considered this? I would be asking this question to Councilperson Grover, or the city manager who was involved, city manager office who was involved in this, of like, have they taken that into consideration? Have they thought about mitigating that in any way?
I would also add, like, I'd want to know the racial and ethnic background of people who, where do the initial complaints come from? And then from the data that the intern went to get, making sure that they were getting, interviewing folks. And what I mean by that is, like, whether that's residents, people downtown, people going to Trader Joe's, whatever. That's what I want to see too.
That's awesome. And again, that may be a question you ask, because again, we're doing it after the fact, right? Like, so
Right.
but this is showing you, though, in a perfect world where we want to get to in our dream state, if the city was holding themselves responsible to these templates as they're doing these things, and they were about to embark on this, we wouldn't be asking after the fact if they went out and sent Matt the intern to, sorry, Matt the fellow. I should not say that. Sorry, Matt is not an intern. I want to make sure I apologize for that, because that wasn't meant to be derogatory in any way. They didn't send Matt the fellow out to, like, they would be thinking themselves, oh, we need to find out the voice of the folks who are most impacted by this, right? And so not those who feel hassled as they have to move around the person as they get into target, right? And so they would be doing this proactively. And then if they were doing it proactively, they would ask Matt the fellow to make sure he was giving some third person guess of what, at least white versus person of color, which is not always perfect from a third person. But, and so again, after the fact, it's not perfect, because Matt would be like, oh, who do you think was, like who did most of the people, and he's going to be trying to remember out of his mind, and he may not have that information. So we see why it really should be working in the other direction. All right. Specific to this policy practice, what factors may be reproducing and perpetuating racial inequities associated with this issue? Anybody else want to talk through how they would think about this? Who they would ask, what questions they might ask Councilperson Grover or the city manager to gauge this? So I could stop speaking.
You'd want to check in with people who are in touch with our residents who are unhoused, and understand from them what they see as some of the inequities, understanding the landscape there better than, say, council members would.
And in our current state, to that point, where we're doing it kind of in the after the fact way, as opposed to proactively.
Yeah.
We might want, which I did ask two different folks outside of Trader Joe's, which you'd be happy to hear. I asked, like, have you been getting hassled since those signs went up? And just personally, my major concern is that residents would be like, you're not supposed to be out here, very Karen-like. Do you see that sign? You're not supposed to be here, or deciding to call 911 or whatever because, they're not supposed to be here per the sign. And they said nobody's even paid attention to the sign. Like, everybody seems to be ignoring it. Nobody's come by or whatever. And so, that's part of the question, right? Like,
yeah.
Has this made things worse, reproduced and perpetuated the situation, or made the situation worse if they were indeed being called upon, which so far not, or if like they had any police encounters because someone called, or if people have started saying to them, no, I'm not giving you anything because you're not supposed to be here per the police sign.
It would be relevant here to know if there were police encounters, what were the outcomes?
Yeah.
What's the end of those stories?
Right. Yeah. And so if there was, like, do we have folks who are already down on their luck, being carted off to a night in jail or whatever, or being removed or hassled or whatever? And so again, in these sections, you're not only scoring a score at the side here, you're writing why you think it's a 2 or a 0 or a 5, right? Why, And then as you get to the 2 or 3, what has the city done to 0, 1, you probably have done nothing. What has the city done to at least recognize the problem? And you would only be in the 4 or 5 if not only they recognize the problem, but they have actually thought about extra, they've thought about, so let's just say they decided anyway they were going to implement the signs, but they made it clear to the police department that they're not to actually go out to any. Instead, we have, created a social service office that's now going to go out, right? So the point is we want to get these folks help. For some reason, we're still going to stick with our signs, but we're keeping away the police problem and we're sending out social services of some other sort, right? That would be a mitigation where they would end up in a 4 or 5. It's not a perfect, we still don't like the signs. It still could leave them hassled by Karens, but at least there's some mitigation that took place. Okay.
When did the signs go up? Do you know? Is it?
I feel like it's in the last 2 months. I don't know, Matt, you might know. April, when I was looking for articles, sometime in April, maybe beginning of April. Okay, anybody has any other thoughts on question 3? All right, so the lovely thing about this is that I'm starting to feel that have disproportionate impacts been identified? And I feel like this now is feeling like a repeat of number 1. Let me just see how many questions. Is this the right one? Is this the right version? Yeah.
Or 3.
Is everybody's?
It feels a little
Yeah.
up to 3 too.
Yeah, so it's feeling a little repetitive. Is everybody looking at my screen? Is anybody looking at the version that you got from last week?
I have it up.
Okay, and is your first question still, were key stakeholders engaged?
Yeah, it looks like the one you're looking at.
Okay, perfect. Part of me, I remember when I was reading that thinking like, why are we giving brownie points for simply engaging the key stakeholders without actually taking action? But I mean, it's like a bare minimum, right? So I was wondering if I took it out or not. So yeah, number 4 is feeling a little repetitive to me.
I think it could be combined with 3.
Yeah, what adverse impact, unintended consequences? Yeah, so
my only thought is like, I love the example we're discussing because I think it's timely and it's real, but it's also a little bit simple. I'm wondering if some like, is there a way you could have like a short version and a longer? Just in this, I agree with you, it's a little redundant here, but I'm wondering if there might be some situations or laws that are being discussed or whatever else where it might be appropriate.
Let's just, if we could just think about these 2 questions on a bigger issue right now. We're not using this for budget. Let's just think back to the TIF issue. And so if I had to ask if there's policies or practices, what factors may be reproducing or perpetuating racial inequities, I could think about the long-term potential gentrification of the area as a result, not saying it's going to happen, to potential for these purposes. And that would be reproducing harm. And then have disproportionate impacts been identified? What adverse impacts? Yeah, I'm still seeing it quite wrapped up. Anybody can think of an example where it mightn't be? And we might be able to ask some of the questions underneath here. We might be able to add those questions here so that at least it's asked.
I like that
so
idea.
I'm gonna put,
Yeah,
go ahead.
so
I'm gonna put a comment here for myself. Why am I suddenly not able to, oh, new comment, there we go. So consider combining 3 and 4. All right, perfect. The shorter the form, the better, so. Are there anticipated equitable, inequitable impacts? What Oh, equitable, sorry, maybe that was right.
Yeah, I
What
think
positive impacts on equity, sorry, different question. Positive impacts on equity and inclusion, if any, could result from this proposal? Which racial equity group could benefit? Are there further ways to maximize the benefit? Can anybody think of a group that could, I mean, like a group that could make a bit positive impacts here? White folks going to Whole Foods can feel safer. I shop at Whole Foods too, so I'm just being general, but
I mean,
Go ahead.
No,
Kate.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm talking a lot.
The thing that's coming up for me is, I think what we talked about before we kind of dug into this example is just like how this could be weaponized if used by other folks, I think, or who maybe could use this to justify saying that, well, we're addressing systemic issues by making sure people get what services they need, but it feels like very unlikely that they're looking at the sign and going to the website on their mobile, on their web device. And so just in reading that, what's coming up for me is like, okay, well, who does this matters a lot. So.
Yeah. I mean, and we kind of said that, and we said that's why it's being rooted in our, this version is being rooted with us doing it, because until we feel like the city has trained the staff, right? I'm not saying there's absolutely nobody who would do this right in the city, right? But like, you send this out to all the different departments, unless the Army's trained, it's not going to get done right. But it does put a good question that I don't know that we have to answer now, because quite frankly, I think this is going to be in pilot mode for a long time to come. Especially with, a new leader coming into the city, trying to figure out where the bathroom is, far less forgetting to, like getting everybody trained and all that other stuff. Like, reality is, I think we're going to be in this mode for a while, but it does then ask, when we transition to a mode where the city departments are doing this, and these are tailored a little more to what's happening in zoning and what's happening in HR and what's happening in finance and whatever, is there a threshold then that it still comes for vetting to, the future EEC council? So that's a good question. We don't have to answer particularly right now, but as it transitions to that, in the next decade or so, if I don't laugh, I'll cry. So I'm laughing. There's still some threshold where for things that meet some criteria, it still gets vetted to make sure it was done correctly. But to that point, Kate, is there anything we could put in? It says here, like maybe we could make it more specific so you couldn't even play around with that, right? Are there anticipated equitable impacts? Maybe we can ask this, like, are these potential impacts actually plausible? Right, everything's possible, but.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the word anticipated, if there's a perhaps stronger, I don't know what it would be.
This is before you bake the cake, general. It should be before you bake, before you roll out. At the very least, even if the plan is baked, we shouldn't be putting up signs. We shouldn't be doing this after the signs are up, right? We'd be at the very least doing them before the signs go up. And so it really would be anticipated. Now we could ask, this is actually a good question, to ask, what has this, because one of the things, because I attended the city council meeting when this was discussed, we were told that, Rockford did this and, they've had a reduction in their panhandling. But like, do we have any data from the Rockfords of the world, somebody else who's done this, of what racial, impact is? And I don't know that they'd be collecting that data. But it's a good question to have. Like, what has the impact been? And so I'm going to put this in red so I go and rephrase it properly. But what has the impact been? Not been, but been in other cities, / circumstances where this has been applied. And I could rephrase that properly later on, but so that's a good point. All right, number 6, I'm going to try to boogie so we can get out of here close to on time. But we still have one other thing to discuss. were alternative plans or improvements analyzed? Are there better ways to reduce racial disparities and advance racial equity? What provisions could be changed or added to ensure positive impacts? I mean, my guess is at some point in time, that phone number there to get help on the email address was an attempt to, like, send folks at least some help. And so if we were to discuss that as a possibility, I mean, the whole point of, I would guess, I have never had to panhandle for my next meal, so I'm not assuming to know. But my guess is that there's a difference between me trying to make sure I get to X pantry at X church on a Monday to make sure I have food for those down moments, and a need I have now, which is why I'm outside of Starbucks asking for money, because the pantry just doesn't give out the thing that I need. So I think there's a difference in immediate needs versus, or needs that can't be met otherwise. People need cash for other things than just food in that absolute moment. So I would kind of look at that like we put an alternative, but that doesn't help them eat today or in this moment. The pantry may not be open, and it doesn't always provide the thing they need. That's the only thing I think about there. Anything else? Is the proposal viable and sustainable? I almost don't think that this fully applies here, because it's, like, I think this would more apply when you're putting in something that's supposed to help. And is it actually going to keep helping? If, let's just say, this did turn into a police calling thing, and that was what was coming out of it, which, fingers crossed, that has not been happening so far, we could start asking questions like, does the police department have the capacity to take on, not that I'm crying any tears to the police department, but to take on this extra load? That's the question I could see asking here. So, I don't know. But I almost see this question as only being really viable for when somebody's putting in place something that's supposed to help. So is it actually going to produce and be able to sustain the benefit that it's? And then, have equity success indicators been identified with a plan to measure? And so let's just say the group was comfortable with, I'm not personally, but let's just say the group was comfortable with this idea that, okay, we're asking them not to panhandle, but we've given them this phone number. We should be tracking how many people were helped, how many people are calling the phone number, how many people were helped. Have the places we've been sending them seen an uptick in people taking on their services, right? Because if we really believe that this was a better option, then we need to be tracking that people are taking this better option. So I would want to know, the circumstance, we're all kind of saying BS below our breaths or above our breaths, but like in a circumstance, if we did think it was a viable other option, I'd want to make sure we were measuring to make sure that citizens are actually taking that up and using those services so that we are being left in a better place. All right. What's missing before I go on to that? What did we not ask ourselves about these signs? And our ordinance, because Jane talked about the ordinance itself earlier, but.
Can you scroll up just to I think it was number 6. I just wanted to see if I don't think we're missing anything. I think it's very comprehensive, since we already cut something even, but I'm not sure if the scoring, I'm not sure if the scoring for 6 makes sense. If there were alternate plans and they were done, does that make sense? I don't know that we choose this. So anyway, I think we don't have to, and that might be something we have to look at more and come back to.
Let me put a note here.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. It's making sense. Because you're getting 0-1 for starting something, right?
Right. It's almost like maybe this one should be opposite.
Yeah.
Yes, we thought about other plans, but they're not right. So we're giving so to get a better score, something like that.
Sorry. Oh, 1 second. Sorry, now there was an actual party in my house. Kids are blasting music. All right, so the question should be reversed there. All right, so like ponder that. Is there anything that we didn't ask that in this case we should have asked? Or this happens, that that this works for this, but it occurred to you that in a bigger situation we might need something else. And so the answer here at the end of this is not that it's like no go, right? Like life isn't that simple. I mean, you might have a situation where you're like this, like, to be fair, in this case, that'd have been like no go, right? But the answer will not always be go, no go. So it may be like suggesting that, let's say we got here and we realized the signs weren't up, the cake wasn't baked, that they had complaints, so they started on this and they put up part of the proposal, but they hadn't talked to any unhoused folks. So we might be suggesting they go back and do these things. They came up with some extra solutions, but you thought of something else from running it through. You might actually offer those solutions as well for them to consider. So we're making recommendations, as well as here, we might have realized that the policy itself is creating loopholes. And an example of this is not exactly that, right? But in my mind, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect here there's a little bit of a unethical problem here between panhandling is unsafe when panhandling is a legal right, like it's a right, right? Like they can do it. And so like the city putting in the narrative that panhandling is unsafe. And so like, it's not quite, I don't know where I'd put that, but like sometimes you may come out and realize that this thing followed all the right rules and policies, but we have a policy or practices that's making something legal in our town or per the code in our town that we need to cut that off so inequitable things don't keep coming through it. And so yes, this is for the city to change, and this is for the person working the policy to consider changing or improving. Does that make sense? I don't know about you guys. I thought this was helpful, just to kind of, I still don't think it's perfect. It will not be perfect. It will not work. We will come up with a situation, within the next 6 months as we're kind of trying to model this that breaks it again. And, we will add and tweak, but this was helpful for us to see that, it's in the ballpark. I don't know. That's how I feel. How do other people feel? I don't know. Everybody wants wine. Nobody wants.
I found it helpful. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So we have a last item, which means we're going to run over a little bit. So it was brought up. I've only been co-chair for a year right now, and my first meeting here on this council ever, not even as co-chair, was the week or the month that a new environmental equity resolution was being passed. Somebody who was on the commission before, that was their last sitting as it was passed. Everybody congratulated them as passed, and then I never heard anything about it again. I mean, meaning somebody has come to share information, but I didn't read the actual details. It was brought to my attention this week that there was in that resolution an actual role for the EEC to play in meeting the ordinance requirements of that environmental justice resolution. So I am not trying to solve that problem tonight. I wanted to see who knows about this and what extra information so the EEC can understand what is our responsibility, because I don't know. So might be closer to that. I don't know who is. Oh, Katie,
I'm trying to throw it in the chat, but it's not letting me.
Oh.
1 second. Like, if not, I can read it.
Is it long? Sometimes they don't let you put long stuff.
Maybe. But I'll read it. So yes, I know Rick is on the line and maybe can expand because this was him and not me, but I have met a couple times with a few folks from Environmental Justice Evanston who have filled me in. So the sections from the resolution where it mentions the Equity and Empowerment Commission, one of them it says, whereas the city of Evanston recognizes that environmental justice is concerned with the equity and empowerment of all community members. Section 3, or sorry, page 3 of the resolution says, the city of Evanston will incorporate environmental justice. I'm gonna see if it's gonna let me do a smaller thing in the chat. There we go. Okay, here we go. So this is from the ordinance, and you can see the city of Evanston will incorporate environmental justice into the city of Evanston ordinances. And then the last sentence is, this work will be done in consultation with Environmental Justice Evanston in this commission as well. And then there is an ask around a public engagement policy, which it's also letting me put in. So the city will develop a policy that specifies clear goals and meaningful public engagement policies and decision-making processes. So I think we can maybe talk about the scorecard perhaps as part of that, and that the public engagement policy shall be developed in consultation with the Equity and Empowerment Commission. Rick, I don't know if you want to, or if it's appropriate for Rick to add in something here.
Yes, please. The more details we can get. I mean, more details given that we're running a little over, but so we can fully understand.
So I'll try to keep this relatively brief, but so just to give a little background, basically when the Environmental Justice Evanston first started working on its tasks, one of the things that we made note of was that not only for environmental justice issues, but for larger racial equity issues, and even beyond that, that the city was receiving a lot of criticism for the amount of public participation that took place, especially when large, impactful decisions were being made. So in our group, as we looked at this and started thinking about the work that would need to take place to ultimately create like an environmental justice mitigation plan, which is what our ultimate goal is, we went, well, this is something important for us in environmental justice, but it's also important for many other large issues, certainly that would apply to racial equity and even beyond that, because it didn't seem like there was really a transparent, viable process where the public could be heard, provide their input on these large decisions, and then have it happen in a satisfactory way. And I don't mean that everyone would provide their input and obviously get what they wanted, but I think in many cases, actually the city had a record for large, very impactful decisions. They would actually do things pretty quickly, and sometimes really not allow a lot of time and not have a lot of great communication out to the public on what was about to happen. So we in Environmental Justice Evanston identified this issue, but we thought it's larger than environmental justice. It actually seemed like at that point in time, something that was appropriate and for the Equity and Empowerment Commission to address. So back then, we actually put that into the resolution, and the people in the E&E Commission looked at the resolution and approved it. And so that was part of our environmental justice resolution. So that's a little background on how it got into our resolution. And so one thing that I would say from spending a little bit of time looking at this is not a trivial task. And as I look at this, and I, we have a group in environmental justice that, has some similarities to your group. And I look at this as something like, this would be a very hard project to address by a group that is organized the way that you're organized and the way we're organized. And what I mean by that is, I think would actually be very advantageous to either have a subcommittee or basically form a group with some dedicated individuals, because this is not a trivial thing and it takes a long time. And I think, Jane, you might remember that back I want to say approximately 2 years ago. I think it was the city of Santa Monica, California. They had a couple of representatives who presented to the E&E Commission. And so they came out. They had actually gone through this process of creating a public participation policy. And they presented and they talked about, how long it took them and what they ended up with. I think they actually presented a deliverable document that showed what the end result was of their work. But I also think that there might have been some paid city employees involved in this who might have been working on this full time. So I don't think it's a small project. I think it's a project that actually will almost demand some attention. And so to do it as one of many tasks or one of many initiatives that you're trying to address, I honestly think that would be tough, or it would take a very, very many years. So it's not an easy thing. One additional thing I will add is I did, for our own purposes, I went through and I did a review of city code a while ago because I wanted to see what was in there and have a much better understanding of what the different elements were in Evanston city code. And if you look at a lot of individual committees and boards and commissions, oftentimes it's written into city code how they go about their business. And it may say, every time this type of activity happens, there are going to be 2 meetings and, that will allow citizens to come in and provide their input, et cetera, et cetera. But there's not like a common set of city code that addresses, common elements across all the different processes. There's almost like a unique and customized public participation sometimes at the level of these commissions and boards and committees. So it's not a trivial thing. I think you probably, all of you who've been involved in some of these activities for a while, you probably realize just kind of at the back of your head that it's not a trivial thing. So, one of the things I would suggest is this idea of a dedicated subcommittee, or maybe even, and I don't know if technically this would be something that could be done, but if the Equity and Empowerment Commission had an ability to form almost like a side committee that may not be constituted from your normal membership, but if you had, maybe 4 people that were actually just dedicated to the task of doing this, that might be something that would be workable. So it's just some thoughts for you, some background information. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer your questions.
I guess I want to share how this is kind of, hitting me, internalizing it for the first time. And, I think, one, I want to go back and say this is why the Equity Council should have really tried to understand who they were as they got started. Because when I got here, we were doing the battle of what kind of equity are we? Are we racial equity? And nobody wanted to stick on racial equity because, other people suffer too, which is absolutely true. But we couldn't name ourselves. And so I'm sitting here struggling. How did this fall in the lap of, a group that is supposed to be a racial equity group? And I mean, I know that the global south suffers from environmental stuff. I know within a neighborhood where the trash, I live right across from the trash thing on the other side of the park from me, ends up is where it's historically black. And so I understand that, but my question here is that with the non-triviality, Rick, should we be looking at people who actually have a background, and I know Katie does, but a background in this type of thing, and as opposed to the kind of backgrounds we screened for when we were looking to bring on members of this group? And I'm wondering if it means that we should be, whether they were that, there's this joint additional ask by the EEC Council and the Environmental Justice Council for some joint member who is a member who cares about equity, again, maybe equity across the board and not just racial equity, even though I know there are racial equity implications to climate justice. but has a climate background, and we bring on commissions who can be new commissioners who can be on in this side group, because like aside from Katie, I don't know who else would have the skill set to, you know, not just throw bodies at, but to like really be helpful. And those are the first thoughts that are coming up for me. Jane's hand is up too. But Ricky, you can respond to, and then maybe we go to Jane.
Oh, you wanted me to respond to what you just said?
Or I don't know if you had a response. If you don't have a response, that's fine. I'm not forcing you to. I just want to.
I mean that certainly makes sense. To basically make sure that you have the right people. I guess one thing would kind of go back to, if it ended up being people in addition to the people that you currently have as your normal members, almost as, and once again, technically, legally, I don't know if that's possible for you to basically form a group that would not necessarily be just of your own members, but maybe bring in 2 or 3 additional people who might be better qualified, and basically have a committee, some type of side committee dedicated to this. I just say that because you're kind of like us, and we're dealing with, you know, enough issues, and to, you know, something like this, it's a big thing to address. It's just not a trivial thing.
We don't have the skill set here. That's not what we scanned for when we were thinking about who was an appropriate member of the, you know, like who would make an appropriate member.
Right.
Of the Jane had questions and Katie had a question.
So we got a bit of a start on some public engagement, kind of an equity lens on community public engagement, and Alejandra and Dolores worked on it. We had a document that was, I think, good shape, and maybe we revisit that and add to that an element of environmental justice. We've already got to start on something that could be a guide to meaningful and inclusive public engagement, both generally, but also specific to environmental justice, if that's what you're getting at, Rick.
So yes, we got that guide from you.
Yeah.
And that kind of raises another issue, which is ultimately, what form should this take? So if I remember correctly, Jane, that was really kind of a, I'm trying to remember the title, but it was something like guidelines.
Yeah.
You know, so it kind of goes back to, is that the form that people think would be the optimal form for something like this to take? And what type of, from a legal standpoint, or from a, you know, having teeth within the city, if it's a guidelines document, are people going to take those guidelines and actually start operating from them? So you know, that would be a question as part of that. But there is a document that you did allude to. And that would certainly be something for people to take a look at and see where that's at, and see what their thoughts are on the content of that document.
And when, and kind of hand in hand with that, we also did a survey of some city staff about all the different ways in which they do community engagement. So there's community engagement when you're doing a street widening project, and the city's not going to endorse to inform residents that, you know, that's public engagement too. And everything from that to doing the really big stuff to develop a new comprehensive plan. So the idea, I think, was to come up with some kind of guide for all city staff and all the different ways in which they do outreach and engagement of the community. The hard part is, though, that unless there's somebody, I think, in the city who is promoting it and getting in the hands of the people who are doing the public engagement, I'm not sure what use it'll have. Ideally, you want to answer your question. Ideally, you want something that is a go-to guide for it. And this equity assessment was a list of questions about who have you engaged and who have you not engaged, and essentially who faces barriers to participating in the conversation around this project or this policy, and how do you overcome the barriers. So it was in pretty good shape. It's just, again, it's unless there's somebody in the city who can make sure it gets to all the right places that it needs to be, the implementation is a challenge.
Right.
Like with
if
the
it would-
scorecard.
Go
Yeah.
ahead. I was just going to say, and if there's any interest, I'm sure I have this document that came from Santa Monica that they worked long and hard on. So that's something else, just as some background material that might be of interest.
Katie, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, just to the also like capacity and skills point you made, I read this as not necessarily that this commission is having to take the lead, but I see the word consultation is what's used in both of these things I put in the chat. So I wonder, and Rick, I'd be happy to follow up with you outside this meeting, but like who owns this? And I almost read it as like the city and perhaps like staff would be convening folks together. And so I think answering that question first is kind of who is able to drive this and according to this ordinance, and then figuring out what is the role of this team to consult as is referenced in the ordinance language could be right, because it does feel like a big thing to take on, but it also, I don't think we'd want to be excluded. So like I said, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that afterwards and just figure out how to get the ball rolling and where it should live.
A real quick comment on that is one of the things that we're discovering, and I don't know if it's an after effect of the pandemic. We talked about some other issues earlier in this meeting relative to what's going on at Haven. Right now, the city bandwidth is so squeezed from people trying to address these myriad many serious significant issues, and so we're challenged on some of the things we're trying to do right now, and it's really hard to get people's time and attention in the city. I know the mayor is up to here, and I know a lot of the other people that we're dealing with are just they're overwhelmed. So what we're starting to do is trying to find other techniques on how we can move some things ahead in an optimal way, maybe with less city participation than we would like. But that's what we're finding is the reality right now. So I agree with you. If you read the language, you could certainly read that language and say, this is more, the city's responsibility, and we would be helping out. I would say that may be technically true, but I don't know if the city is going to be able to, especially in these times, be able to participate at the level that would probably be needed. Just trying to be real honest.
So it seems like we have an issue that nobody's ready to prioritize our own, is what I'm hearing. So, what I want to do is, Rick, Katie, and I are supposed to get together, and let's have an offline conversation about this, where we can maybe take a little more time. We're already kind of 20 minutes behind, that we've stolen time from everybody tonight. And so I want to first thank everybody for staying a little behind. I will commit to making sure I meet with you guys in the next month, and we'll have a little more time to kind of talk through this and figure out where this can honestly fall, and where how we could help consult and give any effort to that, if we feel like there's skill and bandwidth. All right, Matt, can you help take us home?
I think you're looking for a motion to adjourn, Chair Thomas.
I have a motion to adjourn.
I think you need it from someone else.
Oh, darn. I'm persona non grata out here.
I move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
There you go. I'll second. Thank you, Carla.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone. We will see you next month.
All right, good night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.